Musicians and actors of my generation were trained generally with the concept of a fourth wall, that the audience observed what we did, but it was very rare in the 80s that we would talk to an audience. It happened from time to time. But we were largely trained to ignore the audience. And they started to go away, and then we thought maybe we shouldn't ignore them. But one of the really transformative things about playing concerts with Georgia, for me, for 25 years, was that I cannot remember a single concert where we did not talk to the audience. And in fact, most concerts, we spoke to the audience in between every single piece. And there was a quality of generous hospitality for both Georgia and Michael, where they welcomed people in to what we do. They welcomed them in by sharing things that people wouldn't necessarily know about. Things about our process, things about the history of the pieces or the way the piece sits in the repertoire. And it really transformed me. And I remember in particular the point, I was quite young at the time. We played a concert in Fargo, and a woman who I imagine was maybe in her late 70s said, "Young man, I've been going to concerts all my life, and this was the first time anybody ever spoke to me from the stage, and it is as though a wall had been shattered. It's as though you shattered a glass." And so Georgia and Michael had this way of welcoming in not just old friends, not just people who are familiar with music, new music, music and text, but new friends as well. They made a way in for people. And so this interlude is really to follow that great tradition of Georgia and Michael, which is we should not simply come in through the artist's entrance, play music, and leave. we should talk to you. We should have a dialogue together about what this is. And so I have a question or two for our performers and our poet, and you may have questions for them as well. I'm going to try to play Oprah or whatever your favorite host is, and just hopefully I'll just run the mic around and not say much more than I've said. So let's start maybe with in order of creation. If we could start, Ed, with the poetry. I guess I had a question prepared for you, but my first question that comes to mind is you've just heard your poem for the first time, as I have, set to music. And I'm curious to hear your reactions to hearing the poem set to music, and also to hear anything else about the poem that you'd like to share with us.
I'm very glad to be with you. I really don't know quite what to say. I was so stunned by the piece, which I did not expect, but I didn't really have any expectation in particular, but I love the piece. I love the piece. And I don't know enough about music to be able to explain what I think the piece does in relationship to the poem, but for me, the poem it was a breakthrough poem that I wrote when I was 30, and it sounded like nothing I'd heard in poetry before, but the way I wanted to sound. And the poem had, to me, I was trying to capture a kind of quality of mournfulness and celebration at the same time, a kind of darkness and exuberance. And I got the idea that I would begin a poem, "Tonight I want to say something wonderful." But then you really have to say something wonderful after that. You've set the bar really high for yourself. And the poem I was trying to think through the vulnerability of what I felt and the trust that I wanted to give to art and to poetry and to life in the unconscious. And the Sleepwalkers were a kind of physicalization of that trust in the unconscious, and the difficulty I've always had of going to sleep, and then the restlessness of sleep, and because of your fears and anxieties, and then giving yourself up to it, and the trust of that. And the one thing that struck me about the piece is that it captures the darkness of this at night, but then I love those turns to sort of a more joyous moment of celebration of when your hearts are leaving your bodies and then somehow coming back to your bodies. I was really moved by the way the music tries to capture this essential spirit of doing something so ordinary, of going to sleep, but how miraculous it is that you give yourself over to these unconscious forces and then wake up to consciousness again, somehow restored, somehow nourished by what you've discovered or what's been moving inside of you, and then astonished too, surprised, ready to go forward into the miraculousness of daily life. And I just was really very, very moved by the way the music captures the spirit in such an unexpected way of my hymn to the unconscious.
Thank you so much. Jungyoon, a commission comes, a poem comes. What happens? Where does the music come from? What happens next?
Yeah, I don't know how to follow you, Edward. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think actually Edward captured a lot of the things that I did in the music. So when reading his poem, multiple times, reading it slow, reading it fast, and trying to put colors into it, and what's the main theme that comes back. And I thought about two aspects. Sort of, there's a mystery, and another aspect was heart. We in this poem we say our hearts leaving our bodies. So I thought about that, and you'll see the motifs in the music too. I think the mystical aspect is those wrong high notes that you'll hear, and it kind of adds into the ambience, the end of ambience. It's just, oh, is it wrong or is it nice? And the another aspect, the heart, is that I think of heart as sort of a knot, like a knot in your heart. And the dissonance that you hear, especially in the middle section when it gets loud, there's like a punch of ba, and then you'll hear those knots more strongly. So that sort of chord, the knot chord, is there all throughout, but you'll hear sometimes more obviously, more dissonant, and some other times it's just more spaced out, and it's more, it's more ethereal and mysterious. And in terms of pacing of the piece, I have to sort of figure out, am I going to surprise what's coming next, or am I going to set what's coming next? So those two decisions you have to make, and when are you gonna choose, one or the other? It kind of depends on the poem, and also I think perhaps the most, to me, the striking part about the poem is that when the poet says, music of the owls. And suddenly I'm like, oh, music of the owls. And it's sort of a different world I'm imagining when he says that. So I try to capture how everything sort of becomes slower, and you travel into this timeless space, and there are birds singing and things like that. But I try not to do too much, because the words themselves are already so potent and they're beautiful, and all I have to do is sort of setting the scene so that you can imagine yourself what that would look like. So I think my job here was kind of like easy or hard in some ways, depending on how I look at it, is like leaving the space for the words to come out. So I try to make things really simple. So if there is any issue with the text, if it was going too fast, too slow, I could easily make adjustments in the music so that I could easily follow the narrator in that way as well.
Thank you. for our voices, and there's a human voice, and then there's a cello and a violin, which are also voices. I'm curious for any of you who want to share about your process, the process of working with music with narration, which may be a little different from music, from narration or from vocal music.
I have to say, first of all, I have to apologize to Edward because I changed a word in the poem, so I'm glad we're doing it twice. So I'm glad we're doing it twice and I get it right the second time through. One of the great, wonderful things of discovery is finding places in the music to pace and put text. And Jungyoon has written some great pauses in there for the text to either be by itself or to be interwoven. And I always felt my job as a narrator is to be in the music rather than outside it or above it. So in all the collaborations we've done before, that's sort of been my journey, and my job is to interpret but also be in it.
Anything for either of you? Anything you'd like to say?
No.
Okay, yeah, if you like.
Question for me?
I mean, if there's a different process for you around music with narration as opposed to choral music or vocal music, or if there are particular challenges or...
You know, for me personally, the particular challenge of this piece is not so much with the narrator and the beautiful poetry and the incredible composing. It's just the situation we're playing it in. And as an artist, as a performer, we always want to give a sense of emotion to our audience, whatever that might be. And literally, 1 minute into this piece, I am telling myself, tamp it down, or you're not going to be able to come in on your next entrance, because it's so beautiful that, and we have such recent memories of Georgia that it's really emotional and very difficult to play.
Thank you. Susie, anything you'd like to... I will confess, in about 4 bars in, I also started crying and thought, no, you have to do the narration thing. Maybe on the second hearing I'll cry, but there was for me too a sense of there's a sense of loss, and there's also this tremendous sense of who Georgia and Michael were and how they changed me and us in the way that we encounter music, and so a sense of them being very, very, very much with us. Questions that you might have from the audience? Anything that, yes?
I wanted to just confirm, by the way, because I'm sitting right here, that the 2 times when the piece changed from the slow to the pizzicato, I believe it is, and the quicker pace, I glanced over and Mr. Hirsch smiled each time. So he truly did enjoy that. The other thing, and I don't know that this is even possible to answer, but I found the opening with the rising notes on the piano and then the sustained harmonics on the strings, for some reason I found that very evocative of night. And can you tell me why?
I mean, I would think that, I think people think of nights and they actually think about the moon, I think, the night and the moon. And the darkness is all around, but I think the moon is the shining, so we always think about that element. So I think maybe that's why you're thinking about darkness, because that element itself, what we're doing is bright, but you're thinking about that element itself, not what's around it. So I think maybe that's why. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Other questions that you might have?
Our new music director of the Minnesota Orchestra talked about composition when he was introduced to us, and he talked about the fact that he hears so much music that appears to be a construct rather than a composition. What I heard today from you was a composition, and being a performer, I don't understand the art of composition at all. Did you, in composing this, immediately have musical ideas that we heard come to you as a result of the poetry, or did you hear the music in the way the poetry? I'm very curious as to how you came about the ideas that we heard.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and that's really the best compliment, best thing that I ever heard as a composer, that, you think this is a competition, and I exactly know what you're saying, that, competition, I think it's supposed to serve a purpose, right? And in this setting, the purpose is to assist the text. And if I did too much in the music, and we can play so much, so much more as well. And these two players in front of me, they're such great players. So I had to make a decision actually not to write too many notes for them, because that's not what this music is about. It's about supporting the text. And I'm supposed to give just a little enough so that it just triggers your imagination. So not doing too much is actually too hard, and I think if I end up doing too much, it becomes a construct. It becomes its own thing instead of serving a purpose or a role. And in here, the motive that I came up with, I just play around on the piano, and I try to find that fits that role. Can this be played a lot of times? And can it be modified a lot of times and sort of sound the same? So this was the one that I found that I feel like it's interesting, but it's not stable, so I can keep going with it. Yeah, and then every time I come back to the F major, so the piece is in F major, and every time I go back to F major in the poem, then we wake up again. So sort of there is waking up and going back to your bed again. So there's that as well, tonally, that every time we go back, you're back to your bed. You're starting your day again.
We have time for one last question, if there is one.
Thank you very much. It was incredibly beautiful. My mother was a sleepwalker, and so I had a lot of experience of her sleepwalking, and fortunately, we somehow intuitively knew that we should never waken her when she was wandering about. But the difference in what she did and where she went was just such a puzzle and an enigma, and you kept trying to want to figure out what she was doing. And I feel as though this piece I'm sorry she's not with us, maybe she's listening from up there. But my mother would have absolutely adored this piece, and I think would have understood it on a level that few of us could manage.
Wonderful, thank you. Jungyoon, you inadvertently, or maybe deliberately, gave me a mantra for the creative life. You said you wrote something that's interesting but not stable, and so it can keep going. I'm gonna take that home. I want that life. Interesting but not stable. Thank you. So Georgia and Michael felt strongly that a piece of music or a poem needed to be heard several times, many times, in order to be understood. So we thought it's too brutal to hear a piece like this once and then go home and say, well, thank you very much. So we're going to hear it again after this discussion, after we have a chance to set back up. We'll hear it again. We'll take a short intermission, and then we'll come back with the Brahms after this. Thank you. Thanks, friends.